What does this guy have anything to do with the successful hero's journey of this kid? And, given the properties of the Triforce, just how exactly did Ganondorf obtain the Triforce of Power in Twilight Princess? I hope to provide the answers to those burning questions with this video. A perplexing mystery in the Zelda series for me, and quite possibly for you, has always been the Divine Prank. Or should I say, the Divine Pranks? Wait, you're telling me there's two of them? More on that later. Well, first of all, what exactly is the Divine Prank, and how do we contextualize a setting for how the Divine Prank could happen? The Divine Prank, as it is originally described, is more of a remark from the sages who sealed away Ganondorf to the Twilight Realm during the backstory of Twilight Princess. The sage that Link finds after completing the Arbiter's Grounds retells a history of how the Link at the end of Ocarina of Time warned the royal family about Ganondorf's intentions to depose of the King of Hyrule. This concludes with the Gerudo's imprisonment and eventual execution ceremony that we see here in this scene. However, the sages didn't account for one little powerful thing.
Oh, no.
Moments before his death, Ganondorf is endowed with the Triforce of Power, granting him the strength needed to remove his chains. He then kills the Sage of Water. He is consequently sealed inside of the Twilight Realm. The sages dubbed this phenomenon as the Divine Prank. But does this really describe the event which they're talking about? In my humble yet theoretical opinion, no, it doesn't. The ending of Ocarina of Time shows us that Link is whisked by Zelda back to his childhood to relive an innocence that was lost to him. This leaves the Triforce of Courage, which Link was only able to acquire by pulling the Master Sword in the first place, to remain in the adult timeline. Link is then inserted back into the moment just before he pulls the Master Sword. We know that if Link were to pull the Master Sword right at this moment, three of the following events would occur. Number 1, Link would enter a 7-year slumber. This period of hibernation would be required for him to have the experience needed to wield the Blade of the Goddess. This is explained by Rauru after Link first pulls the Weapon of Legend from its resting place during the middle of Ocarina of Time. Number 2, the Sacred Realm with its hidden treasure, the full Triforce, would be up for grabs. We know that when Link originally pulls the Master Sword, he reveals an entrance to the Sacred Realm, where the Triforce is contained. This is how Ganondorf was able to acquire his Triforce of Power during the events of Ocarina of Time. Number 3. As I've mentioned before, the Triforce would split into 3. Ganondorf, who has a sufficient virtue and power, but who is also deficient in wisdom and courage, would try to seize the Triforce. This would cause the Sacred Relic to split, allowing Ganondorf access to only the Triforce of Power. Meanwhile, the Triforces of Wisdom and Courage would then house themselves separately inside of the Hero of Time, as well as Princess Zelda. From what we see at the end of Ocarina of Time, none of these things happen. Or more like, they get corrected by Link. We know that when Link returns to his childhood, he warns the royal family about Dorf. Except this time, he's got a peculiar symbol on his hand. The Triforce of Courage, which he was only ever able to obtain by pulling the Master Sword for the first time. And we also know that, sometime later, Dorf gets imprisoned and then unsuccessfully executed in Twilight Princess, because he somehow has the Triforce of Power, with no concrete explanation as to how this ever happened. Because again, if Link never pulls the Master Sword, the Triforce never splits, because it remains locked away inside of the Sacred Realm. This is how we reveal what the Divine Prank is. We're going to conduct a sort of thought experiment. Let's assume that at the end of Ocarina of Time, Link has a full knowledge of the consequences of completely pulling the Master Sword from its pedestal in his original timeline. Let's assume that with this knowledge, Link understands the exact moment in time he's been spirited back to. Let's assume that with this knowledge, Link understands that the exact moment in time he's been spirited back to is just mere moments before he accidentally opens the Sacred Realm. If he pulls the Master Sword, he grants Ganondorf access to the Triforce. Pretend that Link is a streamer, and Ganondorf is lurking hard right now. Let's also assume that with this knowledge, Link understands that he can't just go telling the royal family about Dorf's plans. He needs evidence that he is who he says he is. Otherwise, he's just some random boy playing the Kokiri and making baseless accusations toward a quote-unquote loyal servant of the royal family. Finally, let's assume that with all of these factors in mind, Link manages to find a loophole. If he were to pull the Master Sword from its pedestal, but not quite all of the way, he would open the way to the Sacred Realm, giving Link full access to the Triforce before Ganondorf. And because Link is only sufficient in the virtue of courage, he would consequently split the Triforce into 3. This split would give Link the Triforce of Courage, Ganondorf the Triforce of Power, and Zelda the Triforce of Wisdom. Well then, that would be the true divine prank. That would be a reasonable explanation for how the Ganondorf of Twilight Princess, just moments before his demise, has the Triforce of Power needed to defy death. Alright, well, how exactly does this divine prank relate to the events of Wind Waker? I'm glad I imagined that you asked that question. You see, when Link is transported back to his child timeline, he leaves behind the Triforce of Courage in his adult timeline. The Zelda Encyclopedia does say that he brings the Triforce of Courage back with him to his original timeline, but that doesn't make any sense to me. That would mean there are 2 Triforces of Courage in the same timeline. And that's a paradoxical rabbit hole I don't want to Alice my way into. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah. Zelda and Ganondorf, however, still retain their respective thirds of the relic in this timeline. Ganondorf has the Triforce of Power in his possession when he is sealed away, and Zelda has her Triforce of Wisdom because game time. Now, fast forward. Aonuma originally said in an interview, hundreds of years, but it's gotta be more like thousands, because how else do the Rito evolve from the Zelda in a reasonable pace of time? Maybe evolution works differently in Hyrule. Fast forward this amount of years, and Ganondorf breaks his seal and returns to a Hyrule, missing its reincarnation of the Hero of Time. And this is how we have our second divine prank. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The Hero of Time didn't take the Triforce of Courage with him, but he did take the spirit of the hero with him, the essence that allows each Link to be able to reincarnate when he is needed, which is usually when this guy comes back. Ganondorf returns during the preamble of Wind Waker, but this guy's spiritual successor is nowhere to be found. This causes the gods to flood the land of Hyrule to keep the Triforce away from the clutches of evil. And while Ganondorf and Zelda retain their respective pieces of the Triforce of Courage is split into 8 pieces and scattered throughout Hyrule sometime before it floods. Meanwhile, this Link goes back to his original timeline and just kind of lives an unfulfilled life. Well, not in the traditional sense. There's a reason we still talk about this guy 25 years after the fact. But unfulfilled by his own standards. This Link becomes the hero's shade who, by his own admission, accepted his life as the Hero of Time, but who could not convey the lessons of this life to those who came after him, binding his soul to a regret that has kept his spirit from moving into the afterlife. The Link of Twilight Princess must find stones, and this is emphasized in the game's text, that howl with the sound of wind in order to summon the hero's shade. A fascinating piece of trivia is that the songs played during these segments are callbacks to songs from both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, games involving the Hero of Time. And some other amazing trivia I recently discovered, thanks to the help of my new friend and fellow content creator, Moxie Watts, is that in order to complete Link's training with the hero's shade, 8 total Windstones must be found, with the first Windstone introducing Link to the hero's shade, and the following 7 Windstones that spirit Link to an ethereal world, where he learns the skills needed to defeat Zant and Ganondorf. These 8 Windstones parallel the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Courage that the Hero of Winds must collect in Wind Waker with numerological accuracy. And I can't think of a better representation of the hero's shade, a broken soul whom the Hero of Twilight needs to find 8 Windstones for, and then train with in order to finally rest in peace, affecting the Triforce of Courage he once possessed 1 for 1 in an entirely different timeline. Once the hero's shade has passed along his battle knowledge, his spirit can now pass on as well. The ultimate speculation here is that the hero's shade passes his spirit of the hero to the Link of Wind Waker. The Windstones that summon the hero's shade allude to the adult timeline, the timeline that is tangentially filled with wind and that occurs alongside the child timeline, as the events of Twilight Princess and the Return of Ganon in the adult timeline are 2 events happening at the same time during 2 different timelines. This second divine prank explains how the Hyrule of Wind Waker was flooded, how the Triforce of Courage was split into 8 pieces, and ultimately, how a Link is able to appear later on in the adult timeline, long after he was originally needed. The hero's shade finally passing on allows for the Link of Wind Waker to be reincarnated, embark on a grand journey, and defeat Ganondorf once again. In other words, the soul of the hero's shade provides the resolution for Wind Waker. So those are the divine pranks and how they resolve Wind Waker. The Hero of Time splits the Triforce with the Master Sword / Sacred Realm loophole in his original timeline, causing the return of his greatest foe, in both the child and adult timelines. The Hero of Time then becomes the Hero's Shade, yearning to pass on his knowledge to those he couldn't. The stones that beckon his soul resonate heavily with the wind, possibly alluding to another timeline that greatly favors winds. Having passed his knowledge, his soul finds rest. The spirit of the hero then departs from the Hero's Shade in the child timeline to the adult timeline and reincarnates as this Link, who saves Hyrule yet again. So what do you think? Kind of plausible, right? If you made it this far in the video and enjoyed it, definitely try force a click on that like button. And if you would like to see more of what's in store from yours truly, certainly click the subscribe button, followed by the bell icon. Doing these two things allow my videos to reach a wider audience, and this helps both the channel, and more importantly, this community grow. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.